The Disney afternoon hit an unexpected hiccup a few years earlier that was finally starting to rear its ugly head. Eisner and Katzenberg would try to strong-arm their former boss Barry Diller, which would lead to unexpected new competition. In 1988, Eisner bought a television station in Los Angeles that eventually became KCAL. With his new station, he obviously wanted to air Disney product. There was a problem. They were already airing the Disney afternoon on Fox affiliates, Barry Diller's network. According to Disney War, Eisner had Katzenberg call Diller. In Diller's recounting of the discussion, Katzenberg said, "We want to renegotiate the Disney afternoon, and we're taking away the LA market." Diller was shocked. They had a contract. "That's not fair," he protested. "I know you bought an LA station, but give us 2 or 3 years to replace this. Let's be reasonable." Diller called Eisner, who refused. "We were there for you when you needed us," Diller reminded him, pointing out that he'd bought the original programming for Disney Afternoon. Eisner still refused. "Okay then, we're out of business," Diller said. Fox promptly dropped the Disney Afternoon from all of its wholly owned stations and encouraged its affiliates to do the same. Still, that wasn't what put Diller over the edge. Even though he felt Eisner had betrayed him, it was when Disney sued Fox on antitrust grounds, claiming Fox was trying to monopolize children's programming, and then complained to the FCC that Fox was a morally unfit broadcaster, with programming like The Simpsons. When Disney lawyers approached Diller about a possible settlement, Diller said the only settlement he'd consider was an apology. Disney ended up dropping the suit in 1992, but Diller told David Geffen, "I'm never going to speak to him, Eisner, again." Fox would launch its own kids' programming in 1990, which would eventually cut into Disney's ratings with the cultural phenomenon Power Rangers, not to mention Batman the Animated Series and Animaniacs. Power Rangers was a show that no one wanted. It was turned down by everyone, and then became the show everyone wanted and wanted to replicate. Premiering in August of 1993, by December it was the biggest kids show by far. According to the Baltimore Sun, it was averaging a 12.5 on weekends with kids 2 to 11. Fox's X-Men was doing a 10.0, and it was first on weekdays. It was doing a 7.5 rating. Second was Fox's Animaniacs with a 5.6, and the highest rated non-Fox show on weekdays was Bonkers with a 4.5. Also in 1994, Power Ranger toy sales would reach nearly $1 billion. At their highest height, Ninja Turtles had done only $450 million in sales. The butterfly effect was now spreading its wings, and the Disney afternoon would take a hit, as did the future of syndication, as networks realized they should be promoting their own IPs instead of other companies. It would even happen to Fox, when Warner Brothers would take its popular hits Batman and Animaniacs and put it on their own WB network. And it wasn't just network competitors anymore. Cable had entered the market as well. Nickelodeon had popped into the world of animation, and their first 3 cartoons, Ren and Stimpy, Doug, and Rugrats, had all been big successes. The syndication window was closing in the not-too-distant future, but for now, Disney television animation was about to change with the times. Greg Weisman, creator, Gargoyles.
The pitch for Aladdin that I pitched to Eisner was just one poster shot of Aladdin and the genie and 3 words, Aladdin the series. He's like, sold. That was it. And I knew that. I mean, in other words, going in, it was like I could have given this whole pitch on Aladdin, but I thought anything I say would only give him a reason to say no. Aladdin's this huge movie. Let him imagine what the show is.
Tad Stones, creator of Darkwing Duck.
At the end of Darkwing, I said, okay, now Darkwing worked much closer. I think I can get even closer with my next show, which was going to be a science fiction show. Again, a comedy. The staff loved it, but the boss did not. I never got to pitch it to Michael and Jeffrey. Had a meeting. I said, I'm going to get a chance to do it. And it's like, no, they wanted me to do Aladdin. Now, Aladdin was done by Ron Clemens, John Musker. I said, I used to room in the same office as Ron Clemens. I mean, I was literally 4 feet away from him. Let me talk to those guys. With Aladdin, there was the other thing that I did the first direct-to-home video, Return of Jafar, and all I was trying to do was keep our budgets up. And I thought, if there's one more source of revenue that comes in from our shows, this would be the excuse to not cut budgets or, give us the money we need to pull off some of this stuff. I called up home video and said, technically, when I do this 4-part episode pilot to set up the show, technically it's the sequel to Aladdin. Are you interested? And the guy took it to the higher ups, and they were not. Then they put out Aladdin on video. Again, it broke records. They made a huge amount of money, and I called the guy back and again restated what I was doing. And this time he took it to the top, and they were very interested. And we had a story meeting with my boss where he gave all sorts of notes. And I said, well, that's a lot to pull off, but we have to do that by March 14th or whatever the date was. He said, why? I said, well, home video is willing to put this out on literally video at that time. He said, that's gravy. Do these notes, and if you get them done in time, that's fine. And I had to be told this later by people who were in the room because I had forgotten that I had said, okay, we have to take those notes, but it also has to be done by this date so I can get it to home video. And we did, and Return of Jafar was made for like $3.5 million, and it made something between 180 and $200 million domestic out on video. This may be apocryphal, but I was told that it was the first quarter where the company wouldn't have grown, I don't know what, 10% or whatever the number was. And I guess a bunch of executives had bonuses tied into, profit growth. Evidently, that was the first quarter that there wouldn't be bonuses. And then suddenly everybody got a bonus, and it was because of Return of Jafar, that out of nowhere, this thing came in and making all this money. And that started the whole direct-to-video thing. All I was trying to do is to keep our budgets up. The stories involving the bonuses, they tried to do things like kind of Lucas had, with Star Wars, had given everybody involved points or some sort of bonus. So they had X amount of money, and they divided it up. So everybody got something. And what that led to is like whoever was last in line, some of the lower level people got a bonus, a check of $50 or $100, whatever. People who basically were in the department who didn't work on the show. And all that did was piss them off because they knew how much the movie had made. I got $14,000. And I told that to Ron and John. Now, I was not an idiot. I knew that the only reason why the movie made that much money is because they had done an incredible Aladdin. And I remember telling that to them, and their reaction was, you got ripped off. And I realized, in live action terms, if you do a crappy spin-off of something that made a lot of money and your crappy spin-off makes a ton of money, you get a 5-picture deal and a new car in your driveway, as a present from the studio. In animation, I was happy to get the bonus, but you pat on the back and then you move on, do something else for us.
Jim Magon, writer.
Disney had a definite style there for a while of, I think we cornered the market in the sort of comedy adventure genre. When Disney execs felt like they needed to branch out, I felt like the formula fell by the wayside, and it's like, hey, look what John Kricfalusi is doing on Ren and Stimpy. Let's do something like that. Hey, look what Warner Brothers is doing with superheroes. Let's do something like that. And I felt like, oh, this is interesting. Obviously we're branching out, trying new things. But it felt weird to me that, that where we had before had been sort of chopping our way through the jungle, creating our own path. Now we were sort of following other people's paths, copying them. And that always seemed odd to me. But anyway, department does what the department does over the years, and it changes and it evolves and it gets worse or it gets better, and is it Disney? Yes, because it's Disney TV animation. They're Disney, and this is the show they're doing. It becomes part of the canon,
In 1994, Variety reported that Disney was spending $50 million to boost its afternoon, which resulted in 2 new series, Schnookums and Meat and Gargoyles. Gargoyles, Aladdin, and Schnookums helped cut into the lead of Fox, but there was a larger problem that television animation was about to encounter. Disney's syndication contract with networks ran only through 1997, meaning that other networks could produce their own shows and make more money. This would leave Disney Animation without a home, because Disney didn't own a network. In fact, earlier in the year they had tried to buy NBC, but failed. Total viewership was also in decline during this period, which had to do with VCRs, computers, and video games offering alternatives to television. And to add to the uncertainty of 1994, Jeffrey Katzenberg left the company. And he left because he was fired by Michael Eisner. In a walk in Aspen together, according to Katzenberg, Eisner promised him that if anything happened to Frank Wells, Katzenberg would take over Wells's role as president. Eisner would later say that Katzenberg misunderstood this conversation. Unfortunately, something did happen to Wells. He was killed in a tragic helicopter crash on April 3, 1994. But business stops for no man, and Eisner went back on his word and did not put Katzenberg in Wells's position as president, nor did he name him as his successor. To make matters worse, in a white glove slap to the face to Katzenberg, Eisner took on the role of president himself. This led to a further deterioration of their relationship, and Eisner gave Katzenberg his walking papers. Eventually, Eisner also refused Katzenberg part of his contract, which stated Katzenberg would get 2% of all profits from any of the projects he had worked on at Disney. So, like all great Hollywood love stories, they went to court. At one point, it came out that Eisner had said he hated that midget, referring to Katzenberg. The case could have been settled for $90 million at one point, but instead it was eventually settled for $280 million in Katzenberg's favor. And then to further complicate matters, Katzenberg went on to form DreamWorks with Spielberg and David Geffen. In the midst of all that, Schnookums and Meat, a funny cartoon show, was being made. Bill Kopp, animator.
And then I got a call from Disney Television, which I'd never heard of. I didn't even know they had it. And Gary Kreisel and Bruce Cranston made me an offer. They said, hey, we need some new funny stuff, and we really think your Eek show is funny, and can you come and do a funny show? And I was like, well, like what? And they're like whatever you want. Seriously. I didn't have to pitch anything. They're just like, just come over and we'll do whatever comes out of your head. It was incredible. So I had a sketchbook full of stuff, and I just came in, and they said, well, how about a cat and a dog? I said, okay. We started with that, and that must have been 92 or 3, something like that. I forget, Pitching at Disney now, I mean, I'm not saying anything out of school. I mean, it's legendarily hard. It's like running a gauntlet. There's all these people in these giant buildings, and you just got to carve your way through. And then if you do get into development, you're going to be there for like a year or two, just trying to get it through. My experience was we had lunch, and like the next week I was there, with a contract. There was no feeling of pressure or, ever like, oh my God, the wheels are coming off. It never was like that. And we had a saying at Disney too. It's like, well, if something crashes, well, they'll just throw money at it, But nobody bothered us when they said you can do whatever you want. They never brought it up. I mean, I remember sitting in the editor room with Gary Kreisel, who was a great guy, and he'd look at some of the rough animation coming back, and he'd look at me and he'd go, "Is that funny?" I'm like, "Yeah, that's funny." He just trusted us, and it was awesome. Now, Jeffy came over one day, as he frequently did while we were kicking it around. And I said, the cat's kind of abrasive. Let's give him, the opposite kind of name, Schnookums, because he was kind of a dick. And then we were just like, what the fuck are we going to call this dog? And we had no clue, just nothing. And Jeffy came up with the name, and I think we were actually barbecuing something, which we also frequently did. And I think he just said meat. And we had the design already. And I said, fuck, that's it, Schnookums and meat. A little confusion came when they made the SpaghettiOs, though. I had a can of them around here and finally just deteriorated. I had to get rid of it. It was going to explode. And it said Schnookums and meat. It was like SpaghettiOs. The lawyers were like, no, man, you got to say that it's not meat. It's not a meat product.
Hey, what happened to your head?
Hey, what happened to your head?
Oh my gosh! My brain's gone!
Oh no, mine is too. What we gonna do, Schnookums? What we gonna do? We don't have any brains.
Now, let's stay calm. I don't think you have too much to worry about, but I know I do. They couldn't have gone far.
Right after the first 2 shorts went onto Marsupilam, I said, okay, let's make it a whole half hour. What else do you got? And I just pulled out the Pith Possum, and the Tex Tin Star bit was going to be a space serial called Guy and the Space Vigilantes. And we're all set to go. And then I got a call from John Cristofalucci, and I had Fontanelli there, all Cristofalucci's guys. Lynn Naylor was there, a couple, Eddie Fitzgerald. And John called me and he goes, hey, man, I heard you're expanding your show, but could you maybe not do a space thing? Actually, it was like getting a call from The Godfather. He was like, hey, don't do a space thing. I was like, I go, why? He goes, well, because I'm working on what I've been working on for a while. Actually, Fontenelle brought that up to me too. So I just turned it into a Western, which was easy. So I was happy to accommodate. But I guess he never sold the space thing.
Biff Possum. At one time, an ordinary laboratory possum, he was changed forever by an experiment gone wrong. An experiment that endowed him with ultra possum-like abilities, turning him into Biff Possum, super dynamic possum of tomorrow, maintaining his secret identity by cleverly disguising himself as Peter Possum, copy boy for a great metropolitan tabloid. He defends truth, justice, and the forest critter way for the good citizens of Possum City.
Let me describe what I have in store for you. The rope that holds you up, Tim Star, will soon be burned through by that candle. When you fall, you'll land head first on this trampoline, which will send you flying into the pen full of rabid badgers. As you roll down the ramp inside the pen, this torch will be knocked over, igniting the trail of gunpowder, burning toward that cannon. Your barrel will roll toward that cannon, and your head will become stuck. The gunpowder will burn the cannon's fuse, and the cannon will fire. The blast will ignite the waterproof fuses on the dynamite surrounding your head. The cannon will shoot you through the roof of the barn and then down into this giant tank full of man-eating sharks. The sharks will eat you. Then the dynamite will explode. The whole mess will be blown skyward, and your remains will fall into this envelope, which I will place on a boat bound for Tunisia. So long, Tin Star.
Anyway, and that was Snickers and Meat. But again, that was so busy. I was the only writer. I wrote all 39 of those because I didn't know any better. After the show was on the air and we were done, Jeffy and I sat around. Like, I went to Hawaii for 6 weeks to recuperate. I came back and they were just like, well, we don't know about the second season. And I mean, Snickers and Meat was not, it was amazing that they let us do it because it's not Disney, really. Well, it's not out of line, but it's weird, So we were just sitting there waiting to get the word. And I mean, the writing was on the wall. I was like, okay, there goes that. What am I going to do next? But I was there, still getting paid. I developed other stuff. Jeffy and I were like, this is going to crack, man. What are we going to fucking do now, We didn't have a plan, And then what happened was they said, oh, sorry, boys, you're through. And we were like, fuck, okay, well, at least we got that out, I mean, that was 3-1, dude. I mean, you had Piff and Tex, and Snickers and Meat was actually the weakest link in the thing. And that was the only part that was foisted on us. But right after they canceled it, that was when Gary Kreisel and Bruce Cranston left to go to DreamWorks. And we were like, and it was like a say goodbye and stuff, and new executives moved in, and we just weren't part of their plan. Because, and rightfully, they didn't know what to do with us. We were like a weird, thing that they were like, now what with these guys? But we had a good time. I think we sort of knew in the back of our heads, like, well, this will never last here. It isn't Disney material. The real story of that time was they were trying, they were trying to keep up with Margaret and Fox Kids, and they were right to try crazy things. To their credit, they stuck right by. And then and Gary and Bruce did the same for us at DreamWorks when we went to do Pennsylvania.
Greg Weisman, creator, Gargoyles.
We had the Disney Afternoon, which we viewed as sort of like the dragon that you had to feed a virgin to every 6 months. So every 6 months we'd go up in front of Michael Eisner. In those days, Michael personally chose the shows. And we would pitch him 6 or 7 shows, and he knew he always had to pick one to put into production. He could pick more than one, but he had to always pick at least one.
Jim Magon.
Yeah, what we would do is every week we would have this writers meeting on, I think it was Wednesday mornings. And it was like, any new writers out there, any new talent, any new ideas? It was always looking for, what are we going to pitch? What's the next big thing? And of course, like everything in Hollywood, it was basically, what was the most recent hit film? With Star Wars, Indiana Jones, whatever. But people would come in and they'd pitch all kinds of things, and the things that were noteworthy would get, I'm not sure we did artwork on all of it, but at least we had a list of shows that we would take to the meetings with Eisner and Katzenberg and say, okay, this is called Wonder Weenie. It's about a guy in a hot dog suit that gets kidnapped and taken to another planet where they think he's a hero because of his television commercials. And it was like, gong. No, next. And we would just do that. We would come up with these sort of 1-2 sentence pitches, and they would go, yeah, or yeah.
Greg Weisman.
We were all sort of keeping an eye on Batman and sort of seeing, was this going to be a success or not? It was a serious drama on cartoon, and would that work? Because the conventional wisdom is it always has to be comedy, and often that it's a pendulum, and that conventional wisdom swings back into the forefront all the time. But Batman was working. It was working so well, they tried it in prime time, and then it didn't work in prime time. And so, the desire for us to do something along those lines sort of waxed and waned, often with Batman's ratings. And, we didn't have superheroes in our camp, so to speak. So we didn't want to do Batman. We didn't want to copy that, but we wanted to try and do something different. But that's not how Gargoyles came about at all. Those are almost two separate discussions that dovetailed later. Gargoyles was initially developed as a comedy adventure, very much inspired by and along the lines of Gummy Bears, Disney's Adventures of the Gummy Bears, which was a show we were really proud of, created by a guy named Jim Magon. We thought it was great. It had this very rich backstory, and we thought it didn't get enough respect, and we thought that the main reason for that was because there was brand confusion with Care Bears. Care Bears was a sort of saccharine, sweet, kind of awful show from my point of view anyway. But the brand confusion was understandable because both shows featured cute, cuddly, multicolored bears. Gummy Bears wasn't that. It was an adventure show. It was funny. It was exciting. It had great comedic villain in Duke Igthorn and great sidekick in Toady and great characters and with a lot of fun. So we set out very consciously to create a show in that vein with the same sort of rich backstory, but that would get more respect. So everything in the 90s, the sort of buzzword was everything had to be edgy. Instead of doing cute, cuddly, multicolored bears, we did cute, cuddly, multicolored gargoyles. Gargoyles having been something that fascinated me since I was in high school. And we thought that's edgier. And instead of setting it in medieval times, we'd have this rich medieval backstory, but we'd set it in the present. We'd have gargoyles have a spell cast on them, and they'd wake up in the 20th century. And that seemed edgier, too. And so we thought we can do this kind of show and have this fun comedy adventure with gargoyles. And so we put together a pitch, and we pitched it to Michael Eisner, and he passed. But we really liked the show, and my bosses, Bruce and Gary, both really liked it. And so they're like, well, take another pass at it. So I showed it to a number of people, just the original comedy pitch, to try and get some feedback and see what else I might do with it. One of the people I showed it to was Tad Stone.
Gargoyles, it had a long history of things that are in a direct line that ended up with gargoyles, and some of them didn't involve gargoyles at all. They were gremlins or whatever. The last thing I'd been playing with, I think, was like a Three Musketeers version of these gargoyles. I had just seen the rough cut of Beauty and the Beast. So again, I'm instrumental. I am not a genius, at least not in that meeting. Greg had asked me in just to talk about things and be in the discussion with his assistants, basically. Again, he was an executive. And I said, what if he was the last of the gargoyles? This could be your Beauty and the Beast, because you've already got the female there. He is one of the fastest thinkers I've ever seen. I mean, while he's watching a movie, he is analyzing, dissecting it, and walking out of a movie, he'll have all sorts of comments where I'm going, well, I thought the colors were nice. Anyway, he was onto something. He kind of said to his assistant, okay, you follow up on the Three Musketeers angle. I want to work on this.
And that really clicked for me. And so I created the character of Goliath with the artist Greg Buehler. And we took the whole show, the whole comedy development, and put it through the prism of Goliath and came out the other side fundamentally with the show that made it on the air. And we were so enthusiastic about it. We came up with all these concepts for villains and adventures and stories and put together this huge long pitch and pitched it to Eisner 6 months after we'd pitched it the first time, and he passed. killed it. And so I thought it was done. We tried. It wasn't the first time I'd pitched a show and it had gotten killed. And the next day we had what we called a postmortem meeting. In those days, Jeffrey Katzenberg was, and Michael, ran the whole company, but Jeffrey Katzenberg was head of the studio. And so Jeffrey had been in the meeting with Gary and Bruce and I, and we were having this postmortem meeting where we were discussing actually the shows that Michael had said yes to and what the next steps would be. And so after having this discussion about the yes shows, we all got up to go. And as I'm about to go, Jeffrey said to me, "Oh, and you're going to work on Gargoyles some more, right?" And Bruce and I sort of looked at each other, and I was like, well, no, Michael killed it. He killed it as a comedy. He killed it as a drama. I don't know what else we do with it. And Jeffrey said, "Oh, Michael didn't kill it. He just thought it needed more work." Now, I had been there the day before, and I knew that he had killed it. But what this was telling me was that Michael may not have liked it, but Jeffrey liked it. In those days, Jeffrey wasn't going to contradict what Michael had said, but he still felt it was worth pursuing. So I also found out later that Gary had talked to Jeffrey about the need to diversify the Disney afternoon from the standpoint of, all we had in those days were very similar funny animal comedy adventure cartoons, and that if we just kept doing that over and over again, eventually the audience would get bored with those kind of cartoons. No matter how good they were, they just get bored with them, and we had to bring other types of things in, which led to shows like Goof Troop, which was really more sitcom than comedy adventure, shows like Schnookums and Meat, which was more sort of Tex Avery short cartoons, and Gargoyles. And so we went back to the drawing board for a third time to try and figure out how we were going to pitch Gargoyles for a third time. And we looked at the show that we had, and we thought, no, this is the show. We don't want to change the show at all. So the problem isn't the show. The problem is the pitch. And we realized that we just put way too much into the pitch. It had diffused it all and gotten confusing and hadn't been crisp and clear. So we just pulled things out, things that we eventually did use in the show. But we pulled all these elements out and really narrowed it down to the key idea, which frankly was the Beauty and the Beast idea. It was this relationship between Goliath, the lead gargoyle, and Elisa, the cop, who befriends him in the 20th century after he wakes up. And we very much played it like Beauty and the Beast, which actually was a movie that had done very well for Disney recently. So 6 months later, we pitched it to Michael a third time, and this time he bought it. We had added nothing to this pitch. We just subtracted. I'd reordered a few things. We may have redrawn a card or two just to clarify an idea, but there was nothing new. It was just shorter. But Jeffrey turned to me and said, "You added a lot to that pitch, didn't you?" And I said, "Yes, I did." And that was history. We went on and made the show.
1,000 years ago, superstition and the sword ruled. It was a time of darkness. It was a world of fear. It was the age of gargoyles. Stone by day, warriors by night. We were betrayed by the humans we had sworn to protect, frozen in stone by a magic spell for 1,000 years. Now here in Manhattan, the spell is broken, and we live again. We are defenders of the night. We are gargoyles.
And so, yes, relative to Goof Troop, it's dark. But I don't think of it as dark. There's tons of humor in that show. The color palette is rich, full of blues and purples and magentas and neon. It's not a dark show either visually or thematically. It's fundamentally a show about a guy, Goliath, who's an optimist, who believes that the world can be a better place, that bad things happen, but they can be fixed, that the next generation can do better, or that we can make it better. And so it's got a fundamentally optimistic tone to it. In terms of supervision, the advantage there was that, I'd been the executive at Disney for 5 years when we went into production. I often compare it to a lunatic asylum, TV animation, in that, there are inmates and then there are trustees. And the trustees are actually also inmates, but they're considered by management to be less crazy. So they give the trustee a stick, a baton, to keep the other lunatics in line. And so that's how I sort of see my role on Gargoyles. I was the lunatic most trusted. So because of what was going on both in the larger company and at TV Animation, there were a lot of shows in crisis for various reasons. And because of that, and because I was in charge of Gargoyles, which I produced with Frank Parr, we were both producers, but from an executive standpoint, it was still me. I was the lunatic most trusted at Disney TV Animation, so they kind of left us alone. And I remember at one point, Frank and I had lunch with Gary during season 2, and Gary said, I want to apologize to you guys. I have not been paying attention to Gargoyles at all. We've had other things going on. How's it going? What's going on? How's it going on the show? And we said, well, it's going pretty good. The schedule's tough, but we're managing, and we're happy with how things are turning out. He's like, great. What kind of stories are you doing? So we started telling him about that, and at one point we told him about Thanatos and Fox getting married and having a baby, and he goes, whoa, I wouldn't do that. No, you can't have the bad guy have a baby. You can't have the bad guy raising a kid. I mean, take the kid away from him, that'll be bad, and if you don't take the kid away from him, then you got a villain raising a kid. Don't do that one. And we're like, look at each other, and then I say to him, well, we already did it. So there's this long pause. Frank and I are both sort of like, what's going to happen here? Like, is he going to still reject it and force us to sort of tear the whole show apart and start over? And you could sort of tell he's thinking the same thing, like, he doesn't like this idea at all. But on the other hand, this was the one show that was going smoothly. And if he rips it all apart, then he's got yet another show in crisis. So after this long pause, he says to us, well, don't dwell on it. I said, okay, we won't dwell on it, whatever the hell that meant. But so we didn't. I mean, we didn't do it. We didn't change anything. But that was the kind of thing. We had very little supervision because of where I had come from. We pretty much made the show that Frank and I wanted to make, and had almost no interference whatsoever. Gargoyles was sort of superheroes done without flagging that they're superheroes, no tights, no capes. For all intents and purposes, that was the genre we were doing. A year or so later, I was in a meeting with Eisner where he announced his desire to buy Marvel. And I watched his corporate strategic guys talk him out of it and say, Marvel's a disaster. They've got their rights sold all over the place. So you'd buy the company and then find out you can't make a movie about Spider-Man because they've triple sold the rights to 3 different companies, and Fantastic Four is being held by this company, and blah, 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 blah. And of course, years later, Bob Iger just bought it anyway. And couldn't do X-Men, couldn't do Fantastic Four, couldn't do Spider-Man, at least not at first. Bought it anyway, and of course it's been a huge success for Disney, but Eisner was talked out of it that day. So he turned to us, to Gary and Bruce and myself, and says, can we use Gargoyles to start a Disney superhero universe? And I said, yeah, and we began developing spin-offs, which we would do backdoor pilots for during season 2 of the show. But by the time those things got on the air, Jeffrey had left the company, Rich Frank had left the company, Frank Wells had died, Bruce had left the company. All the main supporters of Gargoyles had gone. And so that notion of using Gargoyles to sort of launch Disney's own superhero universe sort of fell away. But for 3 or 4 months, it was like, this is what we've got to do because we can't buy Marvel, and Warner Brothers has DC. And on one level, and I don't think we even appreciated it at the time, but the great thing about Michael himself picking the shows was that everyone in every division got on board or got out of the way. In the years that followed, when Michael stopped picking the shows personally, those decisions began being made by committee. and you found you had to get literally a unanimous vote in order to sell a show. You needed not just one important person to say yes or two or three, but literally you needed something like 8 or 9 people to say yes. And if even one said no, the others would jump off the show. And it became much harder to sell. So, Michael was sort of the last of the moguls from my point of view. And we didn't appreciate it at the time because there were so many shows he passed on that we thought were great. But what we didn't get was, yeah, that may have been so, but the shows he picked, we got to just make. And that hasn't been the same in most places since then. I think what happened is that over time, there was this sort of sense within the corporation that Michael was micromanaging, not from us per se. I don't think it had anything to do with TV animation, but just in general, there was a sense that he had to start giving some things up. One of the things he gave up was choosing the animated series, but he didn't invest that power in another individual. It, again, sort of became a decision by committee, a committee where any one person could derail things.
5/8 today to close at 42 5/8, one day after the company announced the resignation of Disney Studios chief Jeffrey Katzenberg. While rumors run rampant about where Katzenberg will end up, Disney chairman Michael Eisner said today the company will likely produce fewer films.
Jeffrey left, Rich Frank left. A lot of this was in the wake of Frank Wells' death, which was a tragedy in its own right, but also destabilized the company. Roy Disney was not happy with Jeffrey, ultimately not happy with Michael either. So ultimately both departed. And Gary had at least a couple job offers that I know about, maybe more. I think Jeffrey wanted him at DreamWorks and had an offer out to him. And then when Bruce Cranston left to go to DreamWorks, Gary decided that DreamWorks would be a good place to sort of work with Bruce again and reform that team. So Gary also picked DreamWorks. So you had Jeffrey, Gary, and Bruce all at DreamWorks. Those were, the 3 guys who I'd worked with. So at Disney, everyone sort of assumed that I'd be going to DreamWorks. So when my deal was up at the end of the 2nd season of Gargoyles, that I'd leave and go to DreamWorks. And I didn't actually want to. I wanted to stay and do a 3rd season of Gargoyles. But it became this self-fulfilling prophecy. They were so sure I was going to go to DreamWorks that they stopped, inviting me to meetings because they thought of me as like I was already spying for DreamWorks or something. It was kind of ridiculous, but they didn't make a job offer to me until a week before I was leaving, at which point, I did end up going to DreamWorks because I didn't have any other job offers. A week out, they finally made an offer to me too late. So I went, and they, really kind of made it clear that I wasn't welcome there anymore. Like November of 1995, I want to say, they came to us or to me and said they wanted me to do the 3rd season of Gargoyles, but they were offering me a demotion from producer to story editor. They said the show was going to be animated at DiC, and DiC had a very bad track record in those days in terms of the look of the thing, and that it would be pre-produced there as well. And they gave me a schedule in November of 1995 where this first script was due in October of 1995. And I looked at the schedule, I said, well, do you have a time machine? Because I don't know how I'm supposed to go back and deliver a script in October when it's already November and we haven't started. And they're like, well, we know that schedule's got to be adjusted, but we wanted you to see where it had to end. So you'd have to catch up. Not instantaneously, but by the end of the season, you'd have to catch up. And so it felt to me like they were asking me to preside over the demise of the show, that they were reducing the budget, reducing the quality of the animation, reducing the quality of all the pre-production, giving us an impossible schedule, and then asking me on top of all that to take a demotion. And we didn't even talk about money. We didn't even get to that. I just said, look, I need the weekend to think about this. And they said, great, take the weekend. And then I came in Monday and they'd hired my replacement already. And I said, what the hell? And they said, oh, well, you can still say yes. We just figured we needed someone in case you said no. Which basically said they were trying to get me to say no. They were trying to make the deal so horrible that I'd say no. So I just said, fine, I'll walk away. And so I wound up going to DreamWorks, and they all sort of patted themselves on the back and said, see, we knew he was going to go to DreamWorks. But of course, they're the reason I went to DreamWorks, because they basically kicked me out. Not literally, but basically. I ended up writing the first episode for them, which they gave to other people to edit and to whatever. So the version that got on TV was, I thought, a mess, but still better than the other 12, which were done by good people, but good people who didn't know the show and didn't have time to familiarize themselves with the show. And so those that last season of Gargoyles, the fans and I just don't even count it as canon to the series. And we look at the comic book series that I did years later as the sort of true third season. I watched the third season. I watched every episode exactly once. That's not quite true. I've watched the one that I wrote more than once, not a lot. But the other 12, I watched exactly once each and made myself do it. I don't know why, but I did. It was very painful for me on a lot of levels. Not just because I didn't think they were very good, which I didn't, even though I know a lot of good people worked on them, but characters were just behaving out of character, and the stories just weren't up to our standards, and it was just a different show.
The original Mighty Ducks movie was made because Eisner's kids liked hockey. So it got a green light, and based on the success of the movie, which the company termed market research, Eisner bought an expansion NHL team and promptly named them the Mighty Ducks. And with that purchase came an addition to the television lineup. The Mighty Ducks, the animated series, premiered in September 1996, and Joe Baruso, an animation veteran, served as a director and supervising producer.
The reason I was able to get a job at Disney and went from Deke to Disney, I think had more to do with the fact that the show that I had directed and produced, Where on Earth is Carmen Sandiego, had won an Emmy in 95 as the best children's animated program. And it was one of the first shows that they called edutainment because it had this emphasis on providing real information, whether it was historical or science, in combination with an entertaining story. It was a detective-type story where a couple of younger kids were pursuing Carmen Sandiego. It was based on a computer game that was very popular at that time. They were looking for someone, specifically for Mighty Ducks at the time. They needed a producer and director, and so I went and interviewed specifically for that project. In the initial meetings, they showed me what they had done to that point, and it wasn't a lot. It's funny, thinking back on it, it had started because Friends was very popular at that time, hugely successful at that time, so they wanted something like Friends. I remember them pitching it to me that way, and I thought, well, that's interesting. In the conceptual art, the development that I'd seen to that point, when it was the Friends concept, it was like we had in the show. Ultimately, it was sort of, human characters with duck heads. So it was sort of breaking with Disney tradition in terms of, DuckTales and things that were clearly, Donald Duck type characters. This was, a new twist on the ducks for them. And that wasn't tremendously interesting to me, but then I can't recall at what point it shifted and became more sci-fi based, heroes in the image of sort of Ninja Turtles. And that's when David Wise, the editor, came on board. It was clear it was going to go that direction. He had a great deal of experience with Ninja Turtles, editing those shows. So he brought all that thinking and that expertise in terms of that particular genre and going that direction. He brought all that. That's one I was excited about. Sci-fi had always been a big interest for me. And then anime was just getting, really a lot of attention at that time. And it really caught my interest, so that when we started talking that way, I was like, oh, well, this will be great. We can use anime influences on this. But I think, the old school that was there, because it was ducks, was a little uncomfortable. But our character designer, Greg Guler, he had a long-standing relationship with Disney TV, and so he had done it all. He really knew it inside out. So at the same time, he had a great interest in superheroes. His background, he had originally come from comic books. So his first love was superheroes. So here he had a chance to combine Disney ducks with superheroes. So it was really a perfect opportunity for him. He is just a fantastic artist. So it all sort of came together. I was relieved that it was moving away from sort of a Friends sitcom to something more sci-fi and hero-based. All our influences in terms of doing the art were harder edged. We never really got to go as far in that sci-fi direction as we would have liked to. But the way it's done is in terms of the development and art direction, it's sort of a consensus. So, you have to put it in front of a whole bunch of people. And, that included, at that time, Michael Eisner and Michael Ovitz. We had meetings where they reviewed the artwork, and so they would have their input. Us kind of reaching for one end of the spectrum and them, sort of pulling us back to something that was a little more comfortable. I was pleased that we were able to go as far as we did, given, what they had done with ducks to that point.
6 hockey-playing ducks appear out of nowhere, and suddenly 6 vigilantes in comic book get-up start showing up whenever there's trouble. Spill it, where are they from? Another planet?
Not another planet, babe. A whole nother universe. And in this universe is a planet inhabited entirely by ducks. They called it Puckworld, in honor of their greatest hero, the legendary hockey player, Drake Duquesne. He was the ultimate team captain. He saved Puckworld from a horde of conquering aliens called the Saurian Overlords hundreds of years ago.
Michael Eisner, he was excited about it because he was excited about the hockey team. So here was just an opportunity to promote it.
Well, this is sad news indeed for Duck fans. It looks like the Mighty Ducks' season-long winning streak may be coming to an end. They're tied with the Maine Quahogs with 40 seconds remaining. At Quahog Center, Jean-Luc Moskowitz is aiming to score again. Oh, a spectacular save by the Mighty Ducks goalie, Wildly. Not only are these Ducks mighty, they're really ducks.
Interesting thing that we did, which was sort of unconventional, was after the shows would come back animated, we would, of course, assemble them. It was decided that they were not funny enough. I would spend large amounts of time each day sitting with 2 comedy writers who would rewrite the shows and rewrite jokes into the shows. And we would sit and we would have to make sure, because the shows were already animated, we would have to make sure that the new lines would work with the mouths that we already had. So it was a grueling exercise of, they're trying to be funny, coming up with jokes, but we had to make sure that they could work in the animation as it was already completed. That was different. Yeah, maybe 1 in 10 were actually, worth all the time and energy.
So these hockey-playing ducks were attacked by a dinosaur named Dragonus. Am I hearing you right?
You're right. You got it, babe.
Beautiful. I could have stayed home watching sci-fi chiller theater, but this is much funnier. All right, what happened next?
Yeah, it was kind of disappointing that it went away just after 26 episodes, because there really was a big push behind it. I mean, the Disney marketing machine and merchandising machine was behind it entirely, and Mattel was on board entirely for the toy line. And I guess it was the second largest toy line in Canada, second only to Star Wars at that time, which makes sense because it was hockey. And I know for a fact that Mattel was disappointed that it went away because they had planned, years of it. It never did horribly, but some weeks it would be just average, but other weeks it would be doing really well. So it was a surprise when we didn't get more episodes. Because I had worked my whole life towards the point of having the opportunity to do the traditional look. And a big thrill for me was to finally be at Disney, which was a personal goal. And so I was happy that I was able to do Mighty Ducks and sort of kick it up a notch in terms of, duck properties.
The last show the Disney Afternoon would produce was Quack Pack, a descendant of DuckTales, but with the nephews as teenagers and Donald as the parental figure, instead of Uncle Scrooge. It should have been a perfect ending to Disney's run, but some things are not meant to be.
I had moved after the Goofy movie into development on Duck Days, which eventually became Quack Pack. By that time, the whole mindset of the studio was changing. You know, people that were valuable before were being sort of pushed aside, and people that weren't valuable were being elevated, and there was a lot more what I call baby suits showing up, middle management who were making decisions, creative decisions about things. People who had never made a single frame of film were making decisions, and it just got very strained, and it got so strained that I eventually said, I need more money or I'm going to go somewhere else, which was very, very difficult for me because I loved Disney. I thought I would retire from Disney, and it just didn't happen. From then on, it was just like, I can't even follow what they're doing anymore. Well, it was part of the deal breaker. We were trying something new. We said, how are we going to do a series with Donald Duck when nobody can really understand Donald? I mean, he's fine in a short where he goes, you know, oh, brother, what's the big idea? You know, that kind of stuff. But to do dialogue is crazy. You know, to try and hang a show on someone that you can't understand was going to be very difficult. And we had some radical ideas, and management looked down their noses at us, and I remember at one point, our producer on the show, Larry Latham, was listening to management spouting about something or another, and he looked over at me, and he did the throat cut, you know, like, cut, I'm out of here, you know, kind of thing. And shortly after that, Carl Gears and I, who were the executive producers on the show, we just said, we're happy to continue working on this, but we can't be running the show because management doesn't believe in us. And management said, yeah, okay, fine. They never even called us and said, what's wrong? Accepted our statement, and which was basically a big, you know, forget you. And it was like, well, they don't care about us anymore. Like I said, that was sort of a turning point for me anyway. I think it was a turning point for the department as well. But and I left shortly after that. You know, we had a terrific run, and then just things started to get weird. That's all. And again, I can't put my finger on it, but to me it had a lot to do with we stopped doing what we were good at and started following other people's leads. Every show we did was like number one in its slot. And so, no, it wasn't like, oh, ratings are slipping, let's do something different. You know, to me, that genre, that style of Disney comedy adventure could still be going as far as I know, you know. But it was like, no, let's do Snookums and Meat, and let's do Gargoyles. Let's do things that look like other studios. I guess felt wrong to me. But again, I'm not in charge. I don't make those calls. I'm a stupid ass, you know, show developer and story editor. So I don't get to make the big decisions.
Dean Steffen, writer.
And then, of course, Quack Pack. It was originally called Duck Days. The way I hear it, and I don't know, because, you know, it could be not exactly true, but I think it's true. Jim Megan and I think Carl Gears were set to develop it. And much like Tad Stones was locked in his office for about 6 months or so when I first started coming up with Darkwing Duck and all the, you know, the artwork or whatever, Jim and Carl were figuring out the show for Duck Days or Quack Pack. And at the time, Home Improvement was a big hit for Disney ABC. And they got the idea that Donald would be like the Tim Allen character, and he would have Huey, Louie, and Dewey, much like Tim Allen was the Harry dad of the three kids. And the conceit was going to be, because Donald he didn't have that many phrases he could say that, you know, Disney actually had a list from the 30s they would hand to us, say, these are the phrases that are recognizable that Donald said, because there just weren't that many words that you could make out the way he talked. So their conceit was that he would have been a tail gunner in some kind of war, and nobody could understand his instructions. So the military sent him to, elocution school, and he would learn to, you know, speak clearer so that now he could do the sitcom-y stuff with the kids and they can interact and stuff like that. So they had this whole thing worked out based upon the Harry dad interacting with. And the way I hear it, they went to pitch at Katzenberg and the whole table of Disney suits. And they said, okay, so And this Donald, he went to elocution school because nobody could understand him in the military. Now he can speak a lot clearer. And that's about as far as they got. And Katzenberg says, wait, you want to change the duck? You're going to change the way Donald Duck talks? And that was pretty much the end of the pitch. So that was it. So 6 months of work down the drain, because without that, they didn't really have a show. So then it became just really harried, and it became Daisy Duck would be a roving reporter, and the kids would be tag-alongs, and Donald would almost be comic relief. You cut to him in the hammock doing gags and stuff like that. And it was a weird time at Disney because we were between shows, and I think I wrote the Bible for Quack Pack. But I guess the show was okay. I'm not sure how it did in relation to the other ones. I don't think of it as one of the great ones.
Jim Peterson, writer.
The origin of it is kind of muddled a little bit because it kind of went through a whole bunch of different creative hands. So there was, I think it was originally Jim Magon's project, and then he ended up leaving Disney, and Carl Gears took over, and then Carl got taken off the project, and it was turned over to Kevin Hobbs, who was our original story editor on Darkwing. And on the artistic side, Toby Shelton was running it, and they had kind of very different views of just between the two of them, how they wanted the series to run. And Toby really loved like classic Donald Duck cartoons, and he kind of wanted to take it like that way. And Kevin was seemed to more want the sitcom-y kind of stuff. We came in, there had already been a couple scripts written, but we ended up rewriting on what would become essentially the first episode, which was where Donald Duck gets drafted back into the Navy, of course, for some bizarre reason.
I feel like quacking, so I think I will. I'm gonna quack, quack, quack until I get fulfilled.
The one that came out kind of still watchable is was an episode called The Really Mighty Ducks. In it, Huey, Dewey, and Louie become superheroes, and Donald becomes a supervillain called the Duck of Doom. And the whole battle is just about Donald trying to get the boys to clean their room, and they're doing everything humanly possible or duckly possible, I suppose, to avoid cleaning their room.
Clean our room? The nerve of some people. We're much too busy. We got a million things to do. We got nothing to do.
And when Duck Days was winding up, it was an era where Disney was letting go all of their staff writers. So, during the Bonkers run, and they were also doing a couple other series at the time, but there were 51 staff writers at that point at Disney TV Animation. And when we finally left at the end of Duck Days, there were less than 10. So part of the reason that Disney lost their market when Fox acquired the rights to the NFL, and a lot of stations that were independent and carrying the Disney Afternoon signed up with Fox and had to drop the Disney Afternoon for the Fox cartoons. But at the time, that was our perception and the executive explanations for why the affiliates were dropping the Disney Afternoon. So that, and also at the same time, Turner acquiring Hanna-Barbera, then he let go all of the staff writers and decided to go to freelance, and Disney kind of followed suit on that because there were a bunch of writers available on the freelance market that didn't used to be available.
In 1997, Disney purchased ABC, which was the final nail in the coffin for what had been known as the Disney Afternoon. Not only was that over, syndication was basically over as well. With their new network, Disney went full Nickelodeon, even bringing in Geraldine Laybourne, who headed the Nickelodeon network, and Disney Television Animation changed quickly in response. In an attempt that the press called the Nickelodeonization of Disney, they bought Doug out from under Viacom and brought in Joanne Salaberry, who helped develop Hey Arnold, and Paul Germain, who co-created Rugrats, to launch Recess, which became the flagship show of Disney's One Saturday Morning. With One Saturday Morning, Disney would retake the title of the #1 kids block. The shows were far different than what had been done in the past, and the familiar faces that had transformed television animation, like Gary Kreisel, Greg Weisman, Mark Zaslav, and Jim Magon, no longer wandered the halls. but a few were still there. Tad Stones.
They had a luncheon at the Rotunda restaurant where they invited, the key people of the department, key creative people of the department were all there for the executives to introduce themselves. And Jerry Laybourne stood up as she's talking about her direction, and she says, and obviously they had worked this out before, says, "Dean, I hate ducks." And then that was Dean Valentine, and he replied, "I hate ducks too," which was basically crapping on, 80% of the people in the room, to say nothing of, you would not have been offered a job because there would be no job to be had if it wasn't for those shows that you're currently crapping on. I was luckily on vacation during that luncheon. I don't know how I would have reacted. I wouldn't have said anything, but I might have walked out, which would have had the same effect. But it was, totally disrespectful. You can certainly say, you guys have done a fantastic job, and now the market's changing. We want to do something entirely different, and we're looking for new ideas, and here's the ideas we're starting with. It's like, why do you have to piss on something, to move forward? So that was, again, they had a pitch, they had a strategy, upper management had signed off on it. So it's just basically, here's our showrunners, and some of you are going to be working on these shows, and some of you are not, so it's just a management thing. It's not like a slow evolution. It is just, hey, this is what we're doing now. And it's like, okay, are we doing any more of that? No, we're not going to do any more of that, but we're still going to do those feature spin-offs that are still doing well. That's that,